What if history isn't what it seems? What if the story of America's discovery is far older and far stranger than we've been told? For centuries, we've embraced a simple narrative. In 1492, Christopher Columbus crossed the Atlantic and discovered the New World, a feat that would alter the course of human history. But what if that narrative is only a piece of the puzzle? What if another group of Europeans set foot on the shores of America nearly 500 years earlier, embarking on a journey that history has largely ignored? The evidence is tantalizing. In Newfoundland, Canada, there is a site called Lanceau Meadows, an archaeological treasure that has quietly upended our understanding of the past. Here, nestled in the windswept landscape, lie the unmistakable remains of a Viking settlement, structures built by Norse hands around the year 1000. For some, this is a footnote in history, a fascinating curiosity. But what if it's more than that? What if it's a doorway into a hidden chapter of human exploration? Imagine it. Nearly 1,000 years ago, long before Columbus's caravel sailed from Spain, Norse longships, sleek, resilient vessels built for speed and endurance, sliced through the frigid waters of the North Atlantic. Their crews were not driven by chance but by intent, seeking new lands to conquer, resources to claim, and horizons to expand. These were people who braved unthinkable dangers, navigating by sunstones and the stars, their lives balanced on the edge of the unknown. They called it Vinland, a land of wild grapes, fertile soil, and boundless promise. But what exactly did they find? Was it a lush paradise as described in the sagas, or something far more complex? The sagas speak of fierce encounters with indigenous peoples they called skirlings, mysterious lands filled with both opportunity and peril, and a yearning for expansion that may have driven them further into the continent than we've ever imagined. But here's where the mystery deepens. If the Vikings reached America, why don't we celebrate their voyages with the same fervor as Columbus? Why does their story feel like a whisper, lost beneath the roar of history? Is it possible that their presence in the New World was far more profound than we've been led to believe? So profound, in fact, that it threatened the dominant narratives of European empires centuries later. Consider this. Lanceau Meadows is just one piece of the puzzle. Could there be more? Hidden sites yet to be unearthed? Stories buried in the soil of the Americas, waiting to rewrite our understanding of who first bridged the gap between the old and new worlds. And even if this history was known, could it have been deliberately erased? Was the knowledge of Norse exploration inconvenient to the political and religious powers that shaped the narrative of history? Think of the implications. If the Vikings didn't just visit but settled, traded, or even integrated with indigenous cultures, how might that have reshaped the course of history? Could their advanced shipbuilding, their metalworking skills, their worldview, and their daring spirit have left a mark on the Americas that we've overlooked? To unravel this mystery, we must return to the past, to a time when the oceans were an uncharted frontier and the world's edges seemed infinite. The Viking longships that carved through icy waves were not merely tools of travel, they were instruments of exploration, symbols of a relentless drive to push beyond the known. Their crews weren't just explorers, they were architects of history. And yet, their story remains shrouded in mystery. How far did they go? What did they find? Why did they leave? And perhaps most intriguingly, why has this chapter of history been relegated to obscurity? The clues are there, hidden in sagas, buried in the earth, and whispered through the ages. To uncover the truth is to challenge everything we think we know about the discovery of America. It's to ask the questions no one dared to ask. What really happened over 1,000 years ago when Viking sails first appeared on the horizon of the New World? And why has history kept it from us? Let's dig deeper into the past, where answers may lie waiting, if we dare to look. To understand how the Vikings could have reached the shores of North America, we must first step into their world, a world of harsh landscapes, fierce independence, and relentless ambition. In the frigid north of Europe, the Viking Age was born out of necessity. The rocky, unforgiving terrain of Scandinavia forced its inhabitants to become seafarers, warriors, and explorers. Overpopulation strained limited resources, and the allure of untapped lands beyond the horizon became irresistible. The Vikings weren't just raiders, as popular imagination often paints them. They were traders, settlers, and navigators with an unparalleled understanding of the seas. By the late 10th century, their reach had extended far beyond Scandinavia, with settlements in Iceland and Greenland serving as stepping stones to the unknown. These outposts weren't just accidental. They were strategic, carefully chosen bases for further exploration. Among these explorers was a figure who would become legendary: Leif Erikson, the son of Eric the Red, a man as bold and controversial as the lands he discovered. Around the year 1000, Leif set out from Greenland with a crew, guided by rumors of a lush, fertile land to the west, a place hinted at in stories passed down from other Norse seafarers. What Leif found was a land he called Vinland, a name that has sparked endless debate. Did it refer to wild grapes growing in abundance? Or was it a metaphor for a land rich in resources, a promise of prosperity for those daring enough to claim it? Imagine the scene: Viking longships, sleek and deadly, navigating uncharted waters. The Atlantic Ocean is no calm, welcoming sea. It's a chaotic expanse of icy waves, treacherous winds, and endless uncertainty. Yet these mariners, armed only with rudimentary tools and their deep knowledge of nature, pressed on. They read the stars, watched the flight of birds, and used mysterious sunstones, crystals believed to reveal the position of the sun even on overcast days. When they finally sighted land, it must have felt like a revelation. The sagas describe a place of extraordinary abundance: salmon teeming in rivers, forests stretching endlessly, and resources that could sustain settlements for generations. But the Viking expeditions were not without challenges. They encountered indigenous peoples, referred to in the sagas as skirlings, and these meetings were fraught with tension, curiosity, and violence. The sagas speak of Thorfinn Karlsefni, a later Norse leader who attempted to establish a more permanent settlement in Vinland. His story is one of ambition and failure, a fleeting attempt to claim a foothold in a land that promised so much, yet proved so elusive. The reasons for the abandonment of Vinland remain a mystery. Were the Vikings overwhelmed by the resistance of indigenous peoples, or did the harsh realities of sustaining a distant colony prove too great a challenge? But here's where the story grows even more intriguing. What if Vinland wasn't the end of their journey? The sagas hint at voyages that may have pushed further south, perhaps into the heart of the continent. Could the Vikings have explored the St. Lawrence River, reaching as far as the Great Lakes? Could they have left behind settlements that remain undiscovered, their traces erased by time and nature? Every Viking expedition carried the promise of discovery and the risk of annihilation. The Norse were masters of adaptability, but even they were not invincible. Still, their achievements, their daring to traverse the Atlantic centuries before Columbus, stand as a testament to their ingenuity and courage. As we delve deeper, the questions multiply. What did the Vikings hope to gain from their expeditions? How far did their influence extend? And most provocatively, could their journeys have laid the groundwork for a hidden history of contact between Europe and the Americas long before the age of exploration officially began? The voyages of Leif Erikson and his successors may be recorded in the sagas, but those stories are only the beginning. To uncover the truth, we must follow their trails across the Atlantic and beyond, piecing together the fragments of a narrative that challenges everything we thought we knew about the first Europeans in America. In the windswept wilderness of Newfoundland lies a place that holds the power to rewrite history. L'Anse aux Meadows, an unassuming archaeological site, is more than a collection of ruins. It's a testament to a daring moment in human exploration. Discovered in 1960 by Norwegian explorer Helge Ingstad and his wife, archaeologist Anne Steiningstad, this site represents the first concrete evidence of Norse presence in North America. At first glance, it might seem unremarkable. Grassy mounds dotting the rugged coastline, remnants of structures long abandoned. But beneath the surface lies a treasure trove of history. The site contains the unmistakable traces of Viking craftsmanship: sod-covered houses, a blacksmith's forge, and iron nails crafted with techniques unique to the Norse. Radiocarbon dating places the settlement at around 1000 CE, aligning perfectly with the timeline of the Vinland sagas. Think about what this means. This wasn't just a random landing or a fleeting visit. This was a constructed outpost, a tangible foothold on a new continent. But why was it built, and why was it abandoned so quickly? Archaeologists believe Lanso Meadows may have served as a base camp for further exploration. It was likely a place for repairing ships, stockpiling resources, and preparing for longer voyages into the unknown. Yet the evidence suggests it was occupied for only a short time, raising more questions than it answers. Why would the Norse abandon a site that held so much promise? Was it conflict with the indigenous peoples? The sagas recount violent clashes with Skrellings, a term the Norse used to describe the native inhabitants of Vinland. These encounters, marked by fear and misunderstanding, may have convinced the Vikings that the risks of staying outweighed the rewards. Or perhaps the harsh North American winters proved too much, even for a people accustomed to the brutal cold of Scandinavia. But what if there's more to the story? Some historians argue that Lanso Meadows was just one of many Norse settlements in the Americas, an outpost, not a destination. Could other sites lie undiscovered along the coasts or further inland? Could the Norse have ventured beyond Newfoundland, exploring rivers, forests, and plains, leaving behind traces that remain hidden beneath centuries of soil and vegetation? Artifacts found at the site only deepen the mystery. Among them are items that suggest connections to distant places, evidence of a network that might have extended far beyond this single settlement. But if the Norse were active in North America, why has history overlooked their achievements? Why does this site feel like an exception rather than part of a larger story? Lanso Meadows forces us to confront the possibility that the history we know is incomplete. It's a tantalizing glimpse into a past that refuses to stay buried, a clue in a puzzle that spans continents and centuries. If the Norse reached this far, what else did they accomplish? And what secrets might still lie waiting to be discovered, hidden beneath the surface of the land they once called Vinland? The site may be small, but its implications are vast. It challenges the narrative that Columbus was the first European to reach the New World, offering a stark reminder that history is often more complex and more surprising than we've been led to believe. The question now is simple. If Lanso Meadows is the proof, what's the rest of the story? Could there be other sites, other artifacts, other pieces of evidence that, together, reveal a forgotten chapter of history? To find out, we must follow the trails the Norse left behind, trails that might lead us far beyond the windswept coast of Newfoundland. If Lanso Meadows is the starting point, then the evidence scattered across North America hints at a far more ambitious Norse presence. Archaeological finds, mysterious artifacts, and tantalizing clues paint a picture of explorers who may have ventured much deeper into the continent than history acknowledges. Take, for instance, the Maine penny, a small but extraordinary object unearthed in a Native American site in the state of Maine. This silver coin, minted in Norway during the 11th century, has baffled researchers for decades. How did an artifact from Scandinavia find its way into a settlement thousands of miles from Newfoundland? Skeptics argue it could have been traded across vast indigenous networks, but what if it points to something more? What if the Norse were directly involved, traveling farther south than previously imagined? Then there's the Kensington runestone, a weathered slab discovered in Minnesota in 1898. Inscribed with what appears to be 14th century Norse text, the stone tells a cryptic tale of explorers venturing deep into the heart of North America. Although its authenticity is hotly debated, it raises an irresistible question. Could Norse expeditions have reached as far as the Great Lakes, navigating rivers and waterways in search of resources and land? And what about the Newport Tower in Rhode Island? This enigmatic stone structure has been the subject of speculation for centuries. Some claim it's a colonial windmill, while others argue its architectural features resemble those of medieval Norse buildings. Could it be another piece of evidence, a silent witness to Viking incursions along the Atlantic coast? Even indigenous oral traditions and artifacts offer intriguing possibilities. Among Native American sites, there are occasional references to objects resembling Norse craftsmanship, items forged from iron, a material the Vikings mastered. Could these artifacts suggest contact, trade, or even conflict between the Norse and indigenous peoples? And if so, what was exchanged? Knowledge, goods, or something more intangible, like stories and traditions? Geography itself supports the possibility of deeper Norse exploration. The St. Lawrence River provides a natural corridor into the continent's interior, while the Great Lakes form a vast network of navigable waterways. For skilled mariners like the Vikings, these routes would have been tempting avenues for expansion. Could they have reached the Mississippi River, or even ventured into what is now the American Midwest? The sagas, too, offer hints of more extensive exploration. In one account, Viking settlers in Vinland describe encounters with rich resources and fertile lands, but also hostile resistance. Were these stories inspired by journeys beyond Newfoundland, encounters with diverse indigenous cultures, or attempts to establish trading posts further afield? And yet, for every tantalizing clue, there are unanswered questions. If the Vikings traveled so far, why is the archaeological record so sparse? Why haven't we found definitive evidence of permanent settlements beyond Lanzo Meadows? Could the Vikings have deliberately kept their explorations secret, fearing competition from rival Norse clans or other European powers? One theory suggests that the Norse may have avoided establishing permanent colonies in North America, not because they couldn't, but because they chose not to. The harsh winters, combined with fierce resistance from indigenous groups, may have convinced them that the rewards weren't worth the risks. But does this mean they simply abandoned their ambitions? Or did they leave behind traces that we've yet to uncover? The evidence may be scattered and fragmentary, but it's enough to suggest that the Viking story in North America didn't end at Lanzo Meadows. It's a story that invites us to dig deeper, to question the limits of what we think we know, and to wonder, how far did these daring explorers really go? Imagine an alternate history where the Vikings not only reached North America, but stayed. What would the Americas look like today if Norse explorers had established lasting settlements centuries before Columbus? Would the trajectory of history have been altered forever, reshaping the cultural, political, and technological landscape of the New World? The Vikings brought with them skills and technologies that could have profoundly influenced the indigenous peoples they encountered. Their advanced shipbuilding techniques, which allowed them to traverse vast oceans with precision, were unmatched in their time. Their expertise in ironworking and metal tools could have revolutionized societies still reliant on stone and bone. Trade networks might have flourished, bridging continents and creating a cultural exchange unlike anything the world had seen before. But it didn't happen, or so we think. The question is, why? One explanation lies in the challenges the Norse faced in establishing a foothold. The sagas describe encounters with Skraelings, indigenous peoples who were both curious and fiercely protective of their lands. These early interactions, often fraught with violence, may have convinced the Vikings that North America was a land too dangerous to claim. Then there were the logistical challenges. The harsh winters of Vinland mirrored those of Greenland, where even established Norse colonies struggled to survive. Supplies from Scandinavia were limited, and the Vikings were far from the centers of power that could have supported their efforts. The isolation of their settlements may have been their undoing, forcing them to abandon their dreams of a permanent presence in the New World. But what if the story doesn't end there? What if the Vikings had left more than physical evidence behind? Some historians speculate that brief contact with indigenous peoples could have seeded new ideas, technologies, or even myths into their cultures. What if Viking longships inspired tales of mysterious visitors from the sea, passed down through generations? Consider the possibility that the Vikings' influence extended indirectly, through trade or storytelling. Could they have acted as a hidden thread in the fabric of history, their presence faint but undeniable? And what if their brief forays into the Americas influenced the later European explorers who followed? Of course, there's also the possibility that the Norse didn't leave because they failed, but because they chose to. Imagine a world where the Vikings decided that the risks of settling in the Americas outweighed the rewards. What if their voyages were exploratory rather than colonial, driven by curiosity and the spirit of adventure rather than conquest? And then there's the more provocative question: what if history deliberately erased their contributions? After all, the narrative of Columbus as the discoverer of the New World served a purpose. It legitimized European colonial ambitions, casting the Americas as a blank slate waiting to be claimed. Acknowledging that the Norse were there first, pagans from a distant age, might have complicated that story. What if the knowledge of America wasn't entirely lost but was suppressed, hidden in archives, or rewritten to fit the agendas of powerful European empires? Could the Vikings' journeys have been a whispered truth, known to a few but ignored in the official histories of the time? Had the Vikings established permanent settlements, the Americas might have looked vastly different by the time Columbus arrived. Would the Norse have introduced elements of their culture, technology, and governance, creating a hybrid civilization? Would the trajectory of European colonization have been altered by the existence of an already contacted and perhaps partially Europeanized New World? History is full of what-ifs, but this one lingers. The Vikings dared to cross an ocean at a time when the world was still shrouded in mystery. They reached a land rich with potential, but their story ended before it could fully unfold, or so it seems. Could the Vikings have been the key to an entirely different history? And if so, what stopped them from changing the course of the world? These questions linger, tantalizing us with the possibilities of a past that might have been and inviting us to imagine a future shaped by their bold and fleeting presence. If the Vikings reached the Americas nearly 500 years before Columbus, why doesn't their story dominate our history books? Why is their presence in North America relegated to a whisper when it could rewrite the story of human exploration? The answer may lie not in what the Vikings did, but in what powerful forces in history needed to conceal or forget. Consider the narrative of Columbus. His 1492 voyage wasn't just a moment of discovery. It was a cornerstone of European identity, a rallying cry for empires hungry to expand their reach. Columbus's journey symbolized the triumph of Christianity, the dawn of a new era of trade, and the justification for colonization. But this narrative required one crucial ingredient. The Americas had to appear untouched, waiting for European civilization to arrive and awaken them. The Vikings didn't fit this story. They weren't emissaries of kings or popes. They were pagan explorers, driven by their own ambitions. Their discovery of America didn't serve the political and religious goals of 15th century Europe. In fact, it undermined them. How could Columbus be the great discoverer if Leif Erikson and his crew had already crossed the Atlantic centuries earlier? There's also the role of the Catholic Church to consider. During the Middle Ages, the Church wielded immense power over the recording of history. Celebrating the exploits of pagan Norsemen didn't align with their goals, especially when Columbus's voyage could be framed as a divine mission to spread Christianity to the New World. By the time the age of exploration was in full swing, the story of the Vikings in Vinland may have been seen as irrelevant, or even inconvenient. But could this erasure have been intentional? History has a way of bending to the needs of those who write it. If medieval scribes or Renaissance chroniclers encountered accounts of Viking expeditions to the Americas, would they have chosen to omit them? Could documents detailing these journeys have been lost, destroyed, or deliberately hidden to ensure the dominance of the Columbus narrative? The suppression of history isn't without precedent. In the 16th century, as European empires scrambled to claim the New World, each sought to assert their own narratives of discovery. Spain, in particular, had a vested interest in solidifying Columbus's legacy, as it validated their claims to vast territories and resources. Acknowledging that the Norse had reached America first, and done so without the backing of a powerful empire, might have threatened those claims. But the conspiracy could go even deeper. Some theorists argue that traces of Viking presence may have been intentionally covered up by later explorers who stumbled upon evidence of their journeys. Imagine encountering remnants of Norse settlements, tools, or even stories among indigenous peoples. Would those explorers have reported their findings, or would they have buried them, ensuring their own names remained unchallenged in the annals of history? And then there's the possibility of accidental erasure. The sagas, which recount the Norse expeditions, were oral histories before they were ever written down. Over centuries, details could have been lost, exaggerated, or dismissed as folklore. Meanwhile, Viking settlements in the Americas, exposed to the elements and abandoned after just a few years, may have simply vanished, leaving behind scant evidence for modern archaeologists to uncover. But the pieces of this forgotten history are there, waiting to be assembled. Sites like Lonso Meadows, artifacts like the Main Penny, and tantalizing clues like the Kensington runestone defy the official narrative. Together, they suggest a story far more complex and far older than what we've been taught. So why does the Columbus myth endure? Because it's a story that serves the powerful. It celebrates European domination and frames the Americas as a blank slate, ignoring the rich and varied cultures that existed long before Columbus, or even the Vikings, set foot on these shores. If the Norse were the first Europeans to reach America, what does that mean for our understanding of history? Could it mean that the foundations of the New World were laid not by empires, but by independent explorers following nothing more than the pull of the unknown? And if so, why would history erase them? The answers might be buried in ancient manuscripts, hidden in the archives of empires, or lying undiscovered beneath the soil of North America. But one thing is certain, the story of the Vikings in America is more than a footnote. It's a challenge to everything we think we know about the past, and a reminder that history is always written by the victors. No story, no matter how compelling, is without its skeptics. The idea that Vikings reached and explored America before Columbus has its share of detractors, and while the evidence is tantalizing, much of it remains open to interpretation. To truly understand the scope of Norse exploration, we must examine the counterarguments, weigh the doubts, and consider what might lie beyond the gaps in the historical record. The Main Penny, for instance, has been a cornerstone for those arguing for Viking influence beyond Newfoundland. Yet skeptics point out that the coin was found in a Native American site, along with other artifacts from various cultures. This raises the possibility that it arrived there not through direct Norse presence, but through trade networks that spanned vast distances. Could the penny be a red herring? A fragment of a story disconnected from the Vikings themselves? The Kensington runestone, too, has faced relentless scrutiny. Linguists and archaeologists have debated its authenticity for decades, with many labeling it a modern hoax. The language inscribed on the stone includes phrases that some argue are inconsistent with 14th century Norse. If it is a forgery, it muddies the waters, drawing attention away from genuine evidence of Norse exploration. But if it's real, it could be one of the most significant historical artifacts ever discovered. And then there's the Newport Tower, often cited as a possible Norse structure. While its circular design resembles medieval European architecture, most historians agree that it's a colonial-era windmill, built long after the Vikings would have sailed these shores. The burden of proof lies with those who claim otherwise, and so far, the evidence has been circumstantial at best. Even the archaeological crown jewel, Lonso Meadows, has its limitations. While it definitively proves a Norse presence in North America, the settlement appears to have been temporary, used for only a few years. Critics argue that this suggests the Vikings' ventures into the Americas were fleeting, experimental at best, and hardly the foundation for a larger narrative of exploration or settlement. Another challenge lies in the lack of genetic and linguistic evidence. If the Vikings had established more permanent settlements or mingled extensively with indigenous peoples, we might expect to find traces of their influence in the DNA, languages, or cultural traditions of Native American groups. But no such definitive evidence has emerged. Does this mean the Vikings' contact with the New World was minimal? Or could it simply reflect the fragility of historical records and the biases of those who study them? Academia itself has been a battleground for this debate. Many scholars caution against reading too much into scattered artifacts or relying on oral histories that were written down centuries after the fact. They argue that the mainstream narrative of Columbus's discovery persists not because of a conspiracy, but because it is supported by more robust and consistent evidence. And yet, there is a counter-argument to this skepticism, a challenge to the very framework of historical inquiry. History, after all, is shaped by those who control the narratives, and the reluctance to embrace alternative possibilities often stems from an unwillingness to disrupt established ideas. Could the academic resistance to the Viking story reflect not just a lack of evidence, but a deeper bias, a fear of rewriting the textbooks? For every question raised, there's an answer, or the promise of one. The absence of evidence does not necessarily mean evidence of absence. The vastness of North America, the passage of time, and the fragility of early settlements all contribute to the difficulty of piecing together the Viking story. If the Norse reached further into the continent, their traces might still lie buried, waiting for discovery. Skepticism is vital. It's what keeps history grounded in fact rather than fantasy. But history is also a living discipline, one that evolves as new discoveries come to light. The story of the Vikings in America may be incomplete, but it's far from closed. So, the question remains, is the absence of definitive proof a reason to dismiss the possibility, or an invitation to keep searching? The truth may be elusive, but the journey to find it is as captivating as the tales that first hinted at it. History is a fragile thing. It's built on fragments of evidence, pieced together over centuries, shaped by the biases and agendas of those who record it. What if the story we've accepted for so long, that Columbus discovered America in 1492, is not the whole story? What if the truth is far older, far more complex, and far stranger than we've dared to imagine? The evidence we've explored, the Vinland sagas, the archaeological findings at Lonso Meadows, and the enigmatic artifacts scattered across the Americas, paints a picture that challenges the mainstream narrative. It suggests that the Vikings, driven by ambition and a fearless spirit of exploration, reached the shores of North America centuries before Columbus. And yet, their story has been overshadowed, relegated to a historical curiosity, rather than a foundational chapter in the tale of human discovery. But why does this matter? What difference does it make whether Columbus or the Vikings were the first Europeans to set foot in the New World? It matters because it reminds us that history is not static. It's a living, breathing thing, open to reinterpretation as new evidence comes to light. It matters because it forces us to question the stories we've been told, and to wonder whose voices have been left out. Imagine for a moment what might lie undiscovered. Beneath the forests, rivers, and plains of North America, could there be other Viking sites waiting to reveal their secrets? Could there be artifacts, records, or oral traditions that might one day confirm that the Norse influence on the New World was deeper than we've ever imagined? And what of the broader implications? If the Vikings did leave a mark on the Americas, however faint, what does that mean for our understanding of pre-Columbian history? Could their interactions with indigenous peoples have shaped events in ways we have yet to uncover? Could their voyages have inspired later explorers, even if only as whispered tales of a distant land across the sea? The truth may be far more complicated than we'll ever know. Perhaps the Vikings were only the first chapter in a long and hidden story of contact between Europe and the Americas, a story that predates the age of exploration and challenges everything we think we know about the past. But here's the most important question. What if we're wrong? What if our history books are incomplete, and the real story of America's discovery has been buried by time, lost to bias, or deliberately obscured? If that's true, then what other secrets might lie hidden in the annals of history, waiting for those brave enough to uncover them? The Vikings may have been the first Europeans to reach America, but their story is just one thread in the vast tapestry of human history. Their journeys remind us of the power of curiosity, the lure of the unknown, and the relentless drive to push beyond the boundaries of the familiar. And as we reflect on their legacy, we're left with a challenge: to keep searching, questioning, and uncovering the truths that have been hidden for so long. The past isn't fixed. It's a mystery, a puzzle waiting to be solved. And the question isn't just what we'll discover next. It's whether we'll have the courage to see history for what it truly is, a story still unfolding,